Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome to our latest episode of Birds and Bytes, Chicago Ornithological Society's virtual program series. My name is Edward. I am president of Chicago Ornithological Society, and I am super excited for tonight's episode because I get the pleasure of having kind of just a nice casual sit-down chat here with birding legend, conservation heavyweight, Judy Pollock. So virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for being here, Judy. Couple of quick notes here before we just get into it. This is a virtual program series. We're no longer, unlike in COVID times, doing a regular once every month thing, but we do still keep these pretty regular as we have events and speakers coming up that we really want to highlight. So definitely check out our website, chicagobirder.org, for future events as we schedule them. And then additionally, what we're going to do here is I'm going to start this conversation off with a couple of basic questions just to kind of get the conversation going. And then we'll have some time as well for then you guys to ask your questions. So what I would suggest is go ahead and put your questions in the chat as they pop up or things come up, and either maybe it'll make sense for us to answer them as we're going, or I'll then call upon you again later in the evening. So you can ask your question in person. We like to try to keep things a little bit more personal here and hear your voices as well. So I could do like a grandiose introduction, but I guess that's kind of the point here, is to get to know Judy herself. I will say this, Judy is obviously a longtime birder and conservationist in the Chicagoland area. A number of great accomplishments and projects that she's been involved with over the decades. Her current role right now is as president of Chicago Audubon, among a number of other different things, but that may be the thing that you guys most notably know her for currently. And I will also point out that Chicago Audubon has been a great partner to COS on a number of different fronts. And I encourage you guys to check out our upcoming episode of Patch Chat, which is a partner series between our two organizations. That should be coming up on March 2nd. We'll be featuring Montrose Point. So if you've ever wondered how to bird Montrose or do it like a pro, that's the program to go to. So without further ado, hi, Judy. How you doing this evening?
Hi. Yeah. I'm a little nervous. Thank you for doing this. I'm happy to be here. I want to say hi to all my friends out there. It's really nice to see all of you. A lot of people I know in those little boxes, which is great.
So I think first things first, let's just kind of get to know you a little bit here. Where are you from? What's your story? Are you from Chicago? How did you come here? And when did you get hooked by birds? When did that fateful day come?
Yeah, so I grew up in New York, like in the suburbs of New York, but I was just at the point where the suburbs gave way to like natural area. So I could walk out my front door and be in Harriman State Park, and I could walk like 30 miles in the woods. So my childhood was spent completely in the woods. That was just, I had this little group of friends, and every day we would just go out. And there was a woman who lived near us, and she would like mark the trails with these little pieces of sheet, and we would follow these trails that she had set out through the woods. And we had all these little spots that we had marked out, the big pine, the dead possum, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And it was like a suburban community, but in a very rural setting. So like our parents all came up from the city, and they knew nothing about nature, right? Nothing. So I had nobody to like really teach me about nature, which in some ways was really fun. I just had to sort of figure things out myself. Like, the plant that I thought was poison ivy, I learned, like as an adult in Chicago, when I got into botany, I learned that it was hog peanut, like not even the right plant. And I was probably wading through poison ivy all the time.
Those darn lookalikes.
Yeah. We used to have fights with ragweed. Like we would strip the ragweed off and fill bags up with it and throw it at each other. And then like I was always the doctors couldn't figure out how I could possibly have such horrible allergies, and I remember like cartoons were our that cartoons are where we learned everything about the natural world. Like if like Foghorn Leghorn, he was like one of my early naturalist teachers. So like if we saw a turkey vulture fly overhead, we'd yell chicken hawk and we'd dive under something. Yeah. So it was a pretty ideal childhood. Yeah. And then and I mean I really didn't get into birding until I moved to Chicago. So I was in my 30s. Um, but I think I just definitely had a hole in my life from having had that childhood and being so immersed in nature, and I think when I saw when I went on a bird walk, I had a parrot. And I remember my husband was like, "Oh, let's do this bird walk at the Lincoln Park Zoo." I think, so if you remember those regular walks at Lincoln Park Zoo, that was my first, birding experience. I was like, "Oh, I don't think I'm gonna like that," but I was completely hooked. I saw, I think, a brown thrasher on that walk and a brown creeper, and yeah, from that it was kind of instantaneous. I just really knew that I needed like this in my life. I think it's a tie into nature for urban people that is really important. At least it was for me.
For those that are not in the know, Lincoln Park Zoo, man, a great birding hotspot. Not just for all the flamingos and stuff they've got there. I mean, and a lot of great stuff to see there. So you're saying your spark bird is a thrasher? Is that what I'm getting from this?
I think so. Yeah. There were a number of birds that we saw that day, but I think the thrasher was the one that, yeah. And I remember like we saw a white-throated sparrow and a white-crowned sparrow. And I remember for weeks afterwards, like staring at those things and going, how do you tell the difference? And then all of a sudden I went, oh, the white-throated sparrow has a white throat. So it took me quite a while to figure that out.
The aha moment. You're just
Right,
like,
exactly. Exactly.
oh, right, okay, all right. Never miscalling that one on a walk ever again. Okay, so you came to Chicago, and you got hooked on birding. Um, maybe I'm misremembering this, but you actually were a teacher for a
Yeah,
period of
that's
time,
right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was a teacher in New York, in the New York City schools, and then when I came to
Okay.
Chicago, I was a teacher in the Chicago public schools for quite a while. A
Nice, like grade school,
teacher
high
and an
school.
and an administrator, high school. Yeah.
Okay.
So I kind of bounced back and forth between the classroom and the central office. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of, I assume you're a teacher at this point, and you're getting into birding. You're learning your white-throat, white-crowned sparrows. And at some point you transition into a career in conservation. What happened there? What made you go, all right, you know what? Birding's just not enough.
Yeah. So, and like in the equation also is two little kids. So, when well, I guess when I came to Chicago, like my major sort of involvement, volunteer involvement was actually with Guatemalan human rights. And then I made a trip down there and I started to get interested in what was going on with nature in Guatemala. And like I wrote up a newsletter about that and did some other things related to that. And so I had sort of had this back way into nature there, but I was already like in this world of organizing, like where I felt like I could accomplish some things. And yeah, and then so I was the North Branch Restoration Project has this program where you can grow plants in your yard. Like they give you the seeds and you grow the plants and you give them the seeds back. There are these kind of rare native plants that is hard for them to collect, and it's easier if people grow them and get the seeds back. So I was doing that program, so I was a little involved. Oh, and I was a little involved with the North Branch. Yeah, and I was a bird monitor. That was kind of my first volunteer birding engagement, was being a bird
Gotcha.
monitor for the North Branch. Um, and then the moratorium happened. And that was like this huge upheaval. Out in the natural areas, there was stuff going on in the newspapers, all these, like fake news even back then about habitat restoration. And you had birders on both sides of it, right? You had some birders who were really, there were a couple of birders who would be in the newspaper regularly saying there weren't going to be any cardinals left on the North Branch if the habitat restoration continued. And, and then you also had birders who were very much in favor of habitat restoration. So I kind of found myself like right in the middle there and trying to make sense of all this. I had connections with the North Branch community, I had connections with the birders. And I think like that's the thing that got me active, like I felt like maybe there was a role for me in promoting dialogue between these two sides because I had a foot in each world. So at that point, that's when we founded the Bird Conservation Network. I started talking to a bunch of other people. And so we put on a conference, the conference that I'm going to show it again, this Peace, Love, and Bird Conservation t-shirt.
Gotta get that on camera for sure.
And so we put on the conference and we invited, a bunch of experts to come and tell us how habitat restoration would impact the birds. And then, that was how it started. And then, then there was this whole organization, and then they made me the president. And, so it just went from there. Yeah. And then at a certain point, so I had two little kids and the full-time job. And then I was like the president of this organization. And, we were doing all this different stuff. At our first conference, we did this little thing called Bird Monitors Brunch, where we, designated this little corner of the cafeteria for anyone who was interested in bird monitoring. And 100 people came. I kid you not, I'm not exaggerating, And so from that, the BCN survey was born, the Bird Conservation Network survey, because people, from all around the region really wanted to do a formal bird monitoring project.
That's impressive, man.
It was a moment. I mean, I feel very lucky and privileged, that I kind of got started. There was just this big wave that I hopped on. That's just the best way to put it. And I feel very lucky and privileged that's because otherwise there's no way that a person like me would have wound up with the career that I have. I mean, I don't. The last biology class I took was in high school, and then I wound up like at the table with all these biologists and et cetera. So, I mean, I feel extremely, extremely lucky. But I want to tell you one funny anecdote from that time.
Go for it.
If I'm sure a lot of you know Donnie Dan and his wife, Jackie. And I was having this conversation with the two of them and Jackie was looking at me and she's like, okay, so you've got a job. Okay, you have two little kids. Okay, you're the president of the Bird Conservation Network. And then she named like a couple of different projects. You're working on this BCN survey thing. And she stands there and she goes, I'd like to see your house. I was like,
oh, yikes.
You got me.
See, one thing you learn in this field is that your car is always a wreck, right? You always got your binoculars and ponchos and muddy boots in there, but oh yeah. Well, I mean, you don't have to share for the public record, but how was your house?
Yeah, no, it is still, I'm not a housekeeper. It's just not my thing. Yeah.
Yikes. Just cutting right to the heart there, huh? Okay, so I'm curious, so this is an interesting angle for me, especially because, I basically grew up in the aftermath of that moratorium, right? I first started becoming aware of the conservation community and doing the work that I was doing literally right in the wake of that, as that moratorium was lifted. So yeah, I guess I'm curious a little bit more about kind of that time, like sort of what was the mood like, right? It sounds like there was kind of a big divide even within the sort of nature enthusiast community and trying to navigate that, and I guess the forest preserves and their staff and how they had to kind of figure out, well, what do we do? And then it almost sounds like maybe I'm reading into this too much, but like a lot of for example, that 100 or so people who were raising their hands to volunteer to monitor was in some ways almost a direct response to that. Well, we got to do something.
Yeah. One thing I think is that, like, like what motivates people to get involved in conservation? It's usually some kind of a controversy, or, a competitiveness, or, I mean, people just don't get involved in conservation just because they like the planet. I'm sorry, but, I just feel like, what motivates people to get involved is, there's like a little bit of anger in it, or a little bit of, I got to do better than you, or, something like that, I'm sorry to say, but that's the way humans seem to be to me.
We're very emotional.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was a really, really tough time. You had the habitat restoration movement here. It was a kind of a pioneering movement, right? And again, I think it happened here because we had such a huge threat. This is like the epicenter of buckthorn, right? Is right here. So you've got this buckthorn that was just like killing our natural areas. And so you had to get this very powerful movement started, to get people out into the woods and start cutting those things down. And it started, with just people like you and me getting out there. And then eventually the forest preserve understood that this was something they had to support, but it really started with people, not staff first, with the communities getting out there. And so, that was a big source of pride. And I think, I think what happened, this is like what I've heard, because I wasn't really involved in restoration at that point, but that up on the northwest side of Chicago in the Edgebrook neighborhood, that there are these homes that are like right in the woods there. They're completely surrounded by woods.
Sure.
And so these restoration groups started coming into the areas that these people really felt were like their backyards, and were protecting their homes. And I think that's what really started the whole thing off. And you've got a lot of really powerful people there, and they were able to convince, they were able to do a lot, but convince the forest preserves to put a moratorium on all restoration throughout the entire county. And then you had this guy in the Sun Times named Ray Coffey, who was just putting article after article after article after article, just like very incendiary, stirring up this sentiment against habitat restoration. And so, yeah.
Darn it, Ray.
Yeah,
Shaking the fist.
really. Oh my gosh. And then, you had birders on either side of it because, at that time, people, well, I think that birders see so much destruction, right? And so when you see things that are being cut down, even if it's for a good cause, and even if healthy habitat is going to grow back there, there's 2-3 years where the place looks like hell, it looks terrible.
Yeah.
And I think, I think birders are particularly sensitive to that, right? Because if you think about, who are the people that are out there on the landscape and that are super familiar with like every inch of the landscape, that's the birders. Oh, I saw my first pine warbler in this tree, or whatever it might be. People are really, really attached to the landscape. And so, it's understandable, I think, that some of them really felt like this was going to be really bad for birds.
Yeah.
Even things like people see, in the wintertime, the robins eat all the buckthorn berries, and people were wondering, like, what's the removal of the buckthorn going to do? But, like, these are things we didn't really know. Now, we've done it and we can see how the birds have responded. But back then it was a big unknown. So.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like a similar memory I have is relatively recently when the great kiskadee, that huge rarity that showed up on the southwest side. Everybody was like, this is like an insectivore. How the heck is it surviving in Chicago in November, this Mexican bird? And it was chomping away on honeysuckle berries, another really horrible invasive species. And I was like, well, pros and cons, I guess.
Yep.
So, okay, so around this time, you mentioned this is when like the BCN survey really, like, it becomes a thing and takes off. And now, I mean, it's been going for a really long time. There was just recently an update to all of that data that these volunteers have been collecting over the years. And I don't necessarily like need you to dive into the data per se, but I mean, I guess this is such a long-standing, volunteer-driven thing. I mean, has that in many ways kind of changed? Do you feel like that's kind of changed the perspective that, land managers, volunteers, birders even have on kind of both the value of that monitoring, but also, for example, geez, maybe buckthorn really is a bad thing, and kind of bringing more people over to that side?
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, you're right. The BCN is just concluding this analysis of their data, and they've done a really great job. Diane Bilderback is the vice president now, and she's leading the charge on this communication. So over the next month or two, you can expect to see all kinds of interesting stuff coming out of that survey and the analysis. But yeah, so that when that started, it was quite controversial, right? And like the first thing we did was sit down with all the land managers and say, look, we got all these birders, they want to collect information, and they want to do it in a way that's helpful to you and that answers your questions about how birds are using your property. And we got ideas from them and everything, but they were still like super threatened by it. I mean, I can remember at one meeting, these land managers saying that if we came on their land, they were going to arrest us, to watch the
Wow.
birds. Yeah, right,
I
right.
mean, brings new meaning to territorial. Geez.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But I think that's changed a lot now. I think people they've realized in these 20, 25 years, whatever it is, that it's, hasn't turned out to be the disaster they thought it was.
We
But
swear those weirdos with binoculars, they're really non-threatening most of the time.
I know. Can you imagine that? It's just so crazy, but yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but I think and I think particularly with this one, we've really done a lot to share these results out and get a lot of the stories. So I think we're going to have some exciting stories to tell about how restoration is helping birds, for sure.
Yeah. In a similar vein, I mean, I guess, again, so like BCN is an alliance of organizations, and, some of them are large, but a lot of them are small. And, you definitely see that dichotomy in a lot of conservation. You've got some really big players in the field, like Nature Conservancy, or, the Cook County Forest Preserves and Park District, those landowners. Then you also got, the little guys like the
Yeah.
Chicago Audubons and the Chicago Ornithologicals and the countless other like localized birding groups. And I guess I'm curious, kind of, as it relates to also to BCM, but just those groups in general. I mean, what's kind of your feeling on your take and your experience on kind of the impact that a lot of these smaller groups can have?
Yeah, boy, I love that question too. So, yeah, and I think the Chicago area is a great place to think about that, because you've got this, it's sort of called maybe the big greens, right? Open lands. Now, actually, Audubon Great Lakes is getting to where they're one of the bigger ones. The Nature Conservancy has always been a big actor. The Wetlands Initiative. You got a bunch of these not-for-profits. And then you've got these little organizations, and then you've got the Bird Conservation Network, which is an alliance of these little organizations. And I think that both of them have a super important role. I mean, the big organizations, obviously, they've got a lot of staff, and they got to pay those staff, and that leads them to make partnerships with landowners. Um, and sometimes and I'm not saying this in a critical way at all. I think that they do great work. I say that like super sincerely. But you gotta know which side your bread is buttered on, right? Like there are certain things that they just can't say. And I think that the smaller organizations really play an important role, not only in being able to point things out that occasionally that these bigger organizations can't point out, but I also think that where the small organizations play a role is in developing a vision. I think, frankly, that those big organizations, I know they do strategic plans and blah, 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 but I think developing a vision is not their strong suit. Their strong suit is
Sure.
kind of seeing which way the wind goes and piling on and, bringing a lot of effort and energy and work to bear on certain projects. But, I think that being able to understand what is a good new direction. I think a lot of times that comes from the smaller groups. And I'll give you like one example of that. I could give you actually many, many examples of this.
I'm sure. How many hours do we have tonight?
Right. Right. But I mean, I will say like, like a lot of times birders don't understand the power that they have, just in terms of, it's so important to just get to know a place and to watch what goes on in that place and to advocate for that place. um, okay, one great example is like Walter Marcis. So he's been like the monitor. He's just gone out and monitored the Calumet for years and years and years and years and watched the bird numbers decline. I remember when they paved over the last gallinule nest, down there. I mean, when they redid that intersection of 130th and Torrance, and they put all that concrete in, like they chunked off a whole piece of that Hegwish Marsh, which was the place where the gallinule was nesting. Those were some dismal, dismal days. It just seemed like the Calumet was going to go away. All the birds were gone from there, and he was just watching every year fewer and fewer and fewer birds, and was able to put out a report showing this to everybody. And all of a sudden it turned around. You had this whole huge organization down in the Calumet of all the conservation organizations, and they were engaging people, but they weren't doing anything about the fact that the resource was just degrading and degrading and degrading. It took him stepping up and
Sure.
And talking about that. And I could give you a million stories like that. I know Jenny Vogt is on this call, and she's been really instrumental out in the Spring Creek area, just in tracking what's going on there and sharing information about it. And she's definitely made bird habitat better out there. And I think you got a lot of these monitors that are doing the same thing. And to me, that role of developing a vision, is a really important one, and it's one that resides with us for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of developing a vision, right, and kind of pushing for the future, I guess I'm curious, one of the big things that's I mean, really, this has always been a theme and should always have been a bigger theme, but it has become a particularly big theme now in the conservation community is, how we handle environmental justice issues and equity issues, things that for a long time really were not part of the equation. And I guess I'm curious, how are you seeing that evolving, and maybe where is that going? And yeah.
Yeah. So, I wish I had made notes for this, because this was the thing that I was so nervous about, right? That I'm going to say like the wrong thing here and it's going to be recorded.
I promise I'll ask a light question next.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, I got a sort of like a long answer that rambles around a bit, and I mean, it starts with me being a female, because there's a lot of dimensions to the way like sort of patriarchy and white supremacy kind of interact, and I think that women in the birding community have a particular set of challenges, as do people of color in the birding community, as do LGBTQ, like you could all these different kind of marginalized groups each have their own challenges. So I mean, I think I'm going to start with just my own group, because that's the one I know from the inside, and then kind of go out from there. But when I first started the BCN, there was this one guy, right, who's I will not name, who was really kind of the guy that you went to. Like he was always in the newspaper if there was a bird story, and he was developing important visions for different areas in the city. And, he was just kind of the guy. And I think he was like very threatened by the formation of the BCN, more of a collective approach, and also, by my leadership. And this guy sent a letter to like pretty much every birder, calling me a cannibal and calling me all kinds of names, right? Saying I was bad for the birding community. I was like pulling it apart. I mean, and like a lot of these people didn't tell me, which was like sort of shocking to me at the time. He figured out who was funding all of our work, and he sent this similar letters to all the funders. He sent a letter to the American Bird Conservancy claiming that I went to a meeting and represented myself as a representative of the American Bird Conservancy, and stated that the American Bird Conservancy was taking a position on this project. I hadn't even been to the meeting, like let alone would I never in a million years represent myself as being who I'm not. So,
Good Lord.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a, it was quite an introduction to the conservation community for me, I'll tell you. And, at the time,
politics at its finest.
Yeah, really. But, at the time I just kind of plowed through it. And I mean, obviously I had a lot of supporters. But, like I have to say in recent years, I sort of look back on, like all the nonsense that was thrown at Hillary Clinton when she ran for president, what's going on right now with Kamala Harris, and the kinds of accusations that are made against her. And, I realized that like women trying to take positions of power really face a lot of, stuff.
Sure, yeah.
And I mean, I think at the time it didn't even really occur to me, but like I recently went back and asked one of the men who was, a supporter of mine, do you think that was about it? He was like, yeah, that was what it was about, and and I think that that's still a little bit true to some extent in the conservation community. You've got like pretty defined male and female roles still, so there's that going on without even like broadening it out to other groups. I think you still have like a little uncertainty in that male female arena, but I would say, and I remember, Edward, like you and I having a conversation like maybe 3 years ago, when like a lot of this discussion got started, and we were just sort of thinking, well, how would the conservation community be for Blacks, Indigenous, people of color, how would they experience it? And we were able to come up with some very kind of superficial things, right? And I feel like our understanding has deepened so much since then, which is really great, and but to me, I'm like eager for the conversation to go way farther than it already has. I mean, it's great. We're looking at bird names, we're looking at how this is a field where you've got like these white men that were supposedly like the, like the explorers, or, of like they're discovering these things that actually there were a lot of people living here who really
half of which were eugenicists after all, and things like that.
There were names for them, we didn't really actually need to name them after these other people, so you've got, I think there's a lot of recognition of that, which I think is wonderful. But how have we in the conservation movement, like how have we gained our power, and how have we hung on to power? I mean, I feel like, again, like there's a whole analysis that's coming out of this racial equity movement that's so valuable to think about in terms of the conservation movement, like, tone policing. Oh my God, I think it's rampant in conservation organizations. You can only sit at the table with the big boys if you have a certain tone, like that's, and privilege hoarding, influence hoarding, like that's another huge thing in our toolkit, right? Because basically, like we're begging for crumbs from, people who are developing this land, and we have to come in the right way to get a little seat at the table, and then we get a little crumb, and then we're really happy about it. We view that as being a big success. and I think that we're sort of addicted to these little successes. And I am too. I'm talking about myself, that, it just feels so great to get these little successes. But okay, like how did climate change happen? You know what I mean? Like we weren't not paying attention to the big picture.
Right.
We were just trying to get these little things. And and another thing that I don't hear discussed much, but that I really think probably happened is that some of the bigger organizations were using the smaller organizations as like a kind of bargaining chip, right? Like, so, you know what, you should give me this, or else all those people are going to come after you. I think that kind of thing has gone on, and also, I mean, I think a lot about um, more specifically like environmental justice. How is it that we were all active in this conservation sphere and we were just fine with, like the Calumet River being this huge dumping ground for industry and never even like really thought about the people who were neighbors to all this, right? I mean, we made all kinds of plans, fancy like land use plans, the big Chicago wilderness land use plan, whatever, and it just didn't come up. We didn't bring it up, and I mean, I think that's on us hugely, so I'm excited for this new era, and I feel like we need to really be examining conservation organizations a lot more even than we are now, in terms of how we operate. But I'll tell you just one more thing about this that I think about a lot. And if other people are thinking about this, I would love for you to comment on it, because I feel like there's a big mismatch between like the way conservationists do their work, um, and the way that like racial justice groups do their work, and environmental justice and uh, social justice kind of groups do their work. Ooh, that's okay. Sorry. um, and I think, sorry, I got to just pick up my train of thought. But I think that there's a big focus in the racial justice movement on understanding that a lot of people have gone through trauma, and on addressing trauma and really honoring people's feelings and centering people's feelings. And I feel like in the conservation movement it's the opposite. Like we also have seen a ton of trauma, like just in terms of the losses that we've seen, losses uh of lands that we've cared about, of species that we've cared about. But we just have been taking the exact opposite tack, where we're like, we're just going to keep going back, we're going to swallow all of our feelings about that, and we're going to keep going back with our hat in our hand, and accept whatever crumbs we can get so that we don't lose more. And again, that's something that I don't think people talk about much, but I think about it a lot. It seems like we have very, very different approaches to very similar problems, which are, which really have to do with denial, right? You've got this huge, corporate structure, which is kind of chewing through land and people equally. And I don't want to sound too, too doctrinaire here, but that's what's going on in our country. And and so how do we approach that? Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's see you follow that up, Edward.
I mean, realistically, we could spend an entire Birds and Bytes episode talking about these themes. And I mean, it's all really important. And I think to your point, obviously that none of this should ever just end here, or even if we did devote an entire Birds and Bytes episode to it, right? These are ongoing conversations that we need to be having, seriously considering if we're going to be successful as conservationists and just citizens of this planet to a certain extent. So yeah, no, I really appreciate your perspective on that. And I'm seeing in the chat quite a few people do as well. So I I'd like to turn it over to audience questions, but I'm going to maybe bring a little bit more levity back into the conversation here before I turn it over and ask you, are you a lister?
Oh, so, okay, when I had my kids, I had to stop listing. It would just, I was really pretty fanatical before that. But I couldn't like have children and have lists. And I was, that was a very happy decision. I was very happy to have children. Um, but I always wondered like what would happen when my kids left the house. And it's taken me a really long time. I have not really had any interest in listing, but this year, I think after the pandemic, I just want to get out there. So I have like made a goal. I lost my life list. That's how much of a lister I wasn't. It was on paper and it's gone. So I am going to try to get my eBird list back up to where my life list used to be. So yes,
There you
I
go.
was here for
There you
the
go.
first
That's a good
time.
goal.
So yeah, I was down in Florida running around chasing birds, and I have to say it was kind of fun.
I'll bet. I'll bet. Your 22 resolution, basically get that life list back up to snuff. Watch out, eBird. Okay, and I'm sorry, just again, speaking of pandemic activities, how the heck did you get so many flying squirrels in your backyard?
So yeah, I had been hearing about them in my neighborhood, and I went to visit someone who had them in her yard, Teresa Horton. Some of you might know her. Yeah, and so I watched, saw what their setup was like. Larry Heaney is her husband, and I just came home and set it up, and I thought maybe it'll happen. So it's just a tray feeder, with some suet and some peanuts in it. And sure enough, they came. Yeah, I've had as many as 8. Pretty fun.
Dang.
Yeah,
Dang.
I feed them every night though. So yeah.
Well, okay, that's it, right? Hungry squirrels are hungry squirrels, whether they fly or not.
Yeah.
All right, so I would like to turn it over to you guys. Does anybody here have questions for Judy? You can either toss it in the chat, or I think at this point, just feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. I got a question in the chat from Kathleen. Kathy, you want to just go ahead and ask your...
Sure. Judy, I think regionally, we owe you just the hugest debt of gratitude for your persistence and your leadership. And I know you're very humble, and probably embarrasses you deeply that I even say this.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry. But so what really excites me is something that I thought I always wanted to see, which was an intersection between the bird people and the plant people. Because it seemed to me when I first got into this, there was a meeting at DePaul University, and all these little stewardship groups were kind of siloed. And it looked like nobody was really talking to each other very much, certainly not in this meeting. There was no flow. I was the only person sort of wandering around, between groups and saying hi, because I was new at this, but I didn't really see much of that. And I don't know if that is a thing, but it really changed during the Laba effort. And so I'm curious about, with Laba, what are some of your favorite successes and challenges? What have you seen that you didn't expect to see? And what are some of the biggest things that you didn't anticipate that came your way? And I'm sure it's just been amazing.
Yeah, so first of all, Laba is a project of Chicago Ornithological Society, and I am very proud to work with them on the project. And I mean, I think that really the biggest successes there are entirely Jeff Screntny's. He does a fabulous job with leading that group, and he's just made it so much fun to be at those work days. He's just got like a great spirit, and he's managed to put together here he is. He just entered the waiting room.
Speak of the devil.
So Yeah, but I think, I really think the biggest success there is just having this big, lively, exciting project going on in the city, which attracts, a lot of people who live in the city, and has bird conservation at its heart. So every single workday. Uh, Jeff, if you just joined, you just joined at the part where I was starting to say nice things about you. So um, yeah, every single workday, we talk about how important Laba is for birds and how the work that we're doing is helpful to birds. Yeah, and I mean, as far as the challenges, I'm trying to think if there's like an unexpected challenge, but I think the expected challenges were challenging enough, just sort of figuring out how to get fire on that landscape, when we're planting all these shrubs in there. I mean, that takes like a lot of planning and forethought and yeah, I think just things like that. I think it's been a little bit of a challenge to have shrubs, fire, and then good response from the herbaceous layer. I think we still haven't quite got that figured out. We've sort of prioritized the shrubs, and I think the herbaceous layers maybe suffered a little bit. So that'd be one thing that I would say is probably a challenge there. But also, Kathy, I want to just, extend the compliment back to you, because I know that you're a person who's really given a tremendous amount to the local conservation community through your art and through your stewardship. So thank you.
Well, I'm actually really thrilled to be steward at an eBird hotspot with the Hosa Park, and everybody knew about it but me. 193 species of birds. So we're just, trying to keep it as nice as we can. I met another birder yesterday through the DAR. Her name is Diane Eubanks. Do you know her? She lives up in Antioch. Anyway, it's really interesting. So we had a conversation about how upset she was that people were taking out buckthorn at Grant Woods. And I had to kind of give her the elevator speech about how exactly what you were saying. Yeah, it's going to look horrible for a while, but it's good. It's good, regionally, to get rid of this stuff. Because each buckthorn, this one sample that Heather Decker and I took from the one buckthorn that she cut down, and we bagged up the berries because I didn't want them at Hosa. We got over 2 gallons of buckthorn berries off of one female fruiting buckthorn.
Yikes.
And so when I did the math, assuming one berry equals 1 cc, and I know that there's a cc is pretty generous for a berry, but I'm just throwing that out there as some sort of frame of reference. How many cc's are in 2 gallons? And assuming the 2 carpels out of the 4 of a buckthorn, you get anywhere between 13,000 and 19,000 potential buckthorn just from one plant per year of a modest size.
Well, and you think about how you got literally every robin and frugivore bird then spreading every one of those to the 4 corners of the earth. It's definitely a successful combination, but not a good one for us in conservation in general.
Right. And so I think that made her pause to have her think about the potential of even one fruiting female buckthorn. Because this was not a huge tree. It was maybe 10 feet tall and 7 feet wide. It was a multi-stem, but it wasn't very big. It was probably as big around as my arm. So it wasn't like a huge, anyway.
Yeah.
But so that's the challenge that we have, in public relations. and getting people on board in Lake County especially. They have it on their century plan to get rid of all the buckthorn, but
Yeah.
Cook County, Jerry Wilhelm says, what a great job Cook County is doing. So just wanted to throw that out there too.
And sounds like, for at least from Judy's perspective, we have a lot of our birding organizations to thank for that. Any other questions for Judy? Other folks have
Can I
questions for
just,
Judy?
I just
Yeah,
want
go
to
ahead.
jump in because, you were going to ask me, Edward, that work-life balance question and you didn't, but
Yeah.
I just want to say that I have wonderful friends and wonderful children and a wonderful husband. Okay. So I feel like that's a big part of my success in life, is that I have a great support system.
Shout out to spouses. Any other questions for Judy?
Deer Grove, were you involved in Deer Grove?
A little tiny bit, really not much.
What do you consider your biggest success besides Laba? I mean, I think of Laba as like, just like you and Jeff, that collaboration was fabulous. But you were involved with Orland Grassland.
Yeah, I mean, I think the project that I'm like most proud of, I think, is the Bartell Grassland and Bobolink Meadow. I was involved in getting that started, and then all the way through. It's a project that I've been involved in, and even after I wasn't at Audubon anymore and I was with the consulting company, I was still working on that project. So I feel like that was a really exciting project for me to see that, turn from these hay fields and really wooded areas into this giant grassland complex, grassland wetland complex, which has got a ton of really exciting, interesting birds at it. So yeah, I would say that's the project that's closest to my heart for sure.
Got an interesting one that popped up here from Chris Hansen.
Yeah, I don't know. No, I don't know. I don't know what I would do. You know what I mean? I would be a little lost because I just really love doing this stuff. It's what I do, and it makes me happy. So I don't know what I would do if we magically solved all the current projects. I'd just be, wandering around waiting for someone to give me some direction, I think.
Okay, so I have a question that I personally find very fascinating. For those of you guys who don't know, the peregrine falcon is Chicago's official bird. But, there was actually a whole process to getting to that point. And Judy, you were one of the folks involved in that. I believe it was 99 when the election happened and all that. Can you give us a little bit of insight, or at least kind of rundown of how that all went down? Because I find that very fascinating. This was all before I was even a birder, but seems like it's such a cool story.
Yeah, so that was when the mayor was Richard M. Daley, right? The second Mayor Daley, and he really loved birds. He was really interested in birds. One time I called up someone in the city, because there was a grant, and I said, oh, there's this grant, let's work on a project together. And he's like, Mayor Daley thinks there needs to be some grassland on the lakefront. And I'm like, Mayor Daley thinks that? Shouldn't I be the one who thought of that? So he was super supportive, and not just supportive. I mean, he really got it. For all of his other failings or whatever, he was great for birds. And so he had in city government, there was this Department of the Environment, and Suzanne Malik McKenna was the head of it. Aaron Dernbaugh was in there. You had a bunch of really great people in there, Sarah Beasley, Lyndon Valicenti. And so they had all these creative, great people. And, they were trying to make Chicago work for birds. Around that time too, the BCN was having these conferences, and our second conference was all about migratory birds and how important the city was for migratory birds. And I think like a bunch of people from the Department of the Environment went to that conference, and I think they kind of got religion. And so it was, it was just a really, really great time for birds. There was a ton of stuff happening. And one of the things was this election, which was the idea of the Department of Environment. So I think, we picked, I don't know, 4 birds and people could vote, and the peregrine falcon won. I think I was rooting for the red-headed woodpecker.
I mean, peregrine's got a lot of cachet, no
Yeah.
doubt about it. I'm almost imagining it's almost like, I feel like the most excitement I've seen on such a broad city scale was when Monty and Rose showed up. But I almost feel like at that point in time, you've got Mr. Daley behind it, you've got this thing put to the city, anybody could vote on it. I almost feel like it's the equivalent kind of energy and excitement. Like, has the city ever been more excited about birds than at that point in time?
Yeah, the other thing that happened at that point was all the bird sanctuaries, that got set up and down the lakefront, like the Montrose expansion, the Natural Dunes, the Jarvis Bird Sanctuary. You had the South Shore Cultural Center. You even had on the water plant, the one that's the Jardine water plant that sticks out into the lake. Like they put a bird habitat on the end of that didn't even have public access. It was only for birds. So yeah, and then from that, the Natural Areas program in the Chicago Park District was born, and then they started doing the landscaping around the lagoons and everything. So yeah, I think that was a time of tremendous energy that has really transformed the city into, I think that our city is just really great for birds. I think it's an outstanding place.
Second city, but
Birds.
first city for birds.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Jill threw a question in the chat there. Jill, you want to ask that question?
Oh, the bird-friendly building ordinance. Yeah. Oh,
Maybe you could give us an update.
yeah. So, okay, Chicago Ornithological and Chicago Audubon and the Chicago Bird Collision Monitors and also Illinois Ornithological formed this bird-friendly Chicago group to try to get an ordinance passed. And we've been at it for 2-3 years now. It's been a long time, but there was an ordinance passed last year, but the ordinance said that we're not going to do this by ordinance. We're going to do an administrative route. And what we're going to do is the sustainability checklist, which is something that every building that wants something from the city has to do. So every planned developments, basically all the big buildings have to do this sustainability checklist, and that's going to be the mechanism for making things bird friendly. So we've been working with the Department of Planning now for the past year, at least, maybe more, and they're going to make this bird friendly provisions mandatory and part of the sustainability checklist, so that everything on the sustainability checklist is optional except for this. This is going to be mandatory. That in order for buildings, to get through the planning process, they're going to need to show that their building is bird friendly. So we've been like waiting, and we with Claire Halpin, who is a COS board member and an architect, and Carl Giametti, also an architect, Ted Wolf, put together this beautiful booklet that we can give to people, architects and developers, to sort of walk them through how to make the buildings bird friendly. And so finally, we've been waiting after we gave this booklet into the city, but finally we just heard that they want to have a meeting. They want to do the final edits on the booklet, and then that this spring they're going to be rolling out the sustainability checklist, and that these changes will be part of it. So hopefully we'll be having a big party this spring, because we will finally have a bird friendly ordinance. When we started it, we were going to be ahead of New York and all these other cities, and then Just, unfortunately, it didn't work that way.
Yeah, we can say we planted the seed, right? We
Yeah,
started
yeah.
blazing the trail.
Right, right.
Oh man, that's gonna be the best, most technical book release party ever. Thank you for that update. Any other questions for Judy? Christine, you want to go ahead and ask that question in person?
Oops. Oh, you can hear me. Yeah, I was kind of curious how pastries figure into your efforts, Judy.
So like Christine is a fellow Italian, and we did have a pastry tradition. I don't know if anybody else used to go to Pasticceria Natalina on Clark Street, but yeah, that was a really, really, it was a great tragedy when that place closed.
Bakery's closing is a travesty.
Really.
Well, on that note, sorry, what was that, Mary?
Is there a replacement for that place? Any recommendations?
Sorry. They used to overnight the ricotta cheese from Sicily. I mean, there's just, as far as I know,
Dang.
no one's doing that yet.
Well, on that note, I don't know if we can top, favorite birding bakeries on a Birds and Bites episode here. So unless we got some major burning questions here, I think I'm going to go ahead and close it out here for the evening. Can I get a huge round of virtual applause for Judy, just in general, for being here, for being so willing to sit in the hot seat, so to speak, here and talk to us about your life and your work, and just for all the amazing work that you have done over the decades. I know, even for me personally, you've been a mentor to me, and I think many other people on this call. Just keep on being awesome. And
I just want to say that this means so much to me because, the Chicago birding community is really where my heart is. And so I just appreciate this so much. And really, all of you that I know, I love. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And even the people she doesn't know, right?
Yeah,
you're just
I
people
do. I
to
love
learn to love at some point.
them.
But yeah, thank you so much, Judy, for your time. Thank you guys all for joining us this evening and just hanging out and chatting with us. And I just really appreciate you guys all taking time of your evening to hang out with us. So once again, feel free to check out our website. We don't currently have any future Birds and Bites episodes scheduled, but there will be more. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we actually have a next episode of Patch Chat, which is the collaborative program between Chicago Audubon and Chicago Ornithological. It's going to be about Montrose Point. That'll be coming up on March 2nd. And just hop on over. I literally was up the other night finishing putting all our spring field trips on there. So go sign up before they fill up. Once again, thank you, Judy. Definitely also hop on over to the Chicago Audubon Society website for all the amazing work that they do as well. And on that note, I'll go ahead and stop recording and just say have a great night, everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay warm out there. And we will see you guys next time.